The idea that a story is only capable of being told in a certain medium comes up time to time. It's a conversation often heard with movie adaptations, seeing how a comic book translates to a screen. Each medium has identifiers that define it, so what is that with games? The most apparent difference is the level of tactile interactivity that exists in games. So what can games do with interactivity that makes a game's story exclusive to the medium? Commonly, games rely on pauses to gameplay as a primary vehicle for narrative, where the play sessions are segmented with a cutscene. There's even a cut to black as a full segmentation between gameplay and cutscene. There's no blending between the two at all. This method crafts a story outside of what the player controls. They may relay some information or a decision that's been made previously in the game, such as in an RPG like The Witcher.
Geralt! Ciri!
In cases like this, that's a predetermined story presented as a result of gameplay.
Where have you two been?
Went to Kaer Morhen first.
What kind of stories are made and told purely through gameplay? For this, I think the idea is found in games built on variables, games that give us what could be called water cooler stories. Stories and experiences that are unique to a player because of how the gameplay responds to that specific player's actions. In many role-playing games, decisions in gameplay will be reflected in a cutscene. This can be something as simple as equipping gear that is then visible in a cutscene, or it can be more complex like characters interacting with you differently.
Your reward. Didn't come to collect on a deal.
But I'm talking about the game responding within the gameplay itself. This is something touched on in roguelites such as Invisible Ink, where stages are randomized for each playthrough and enemies gear up the longer you stay in a level. But each player's run being fundamentally different based on the randomized level design gives those playthroughs a personalized aspect.
Unlocked nanofab located. We found what we came for.
Games are more frequently highlighting how you play them and putting an emphasis on the act of playing. This is recently and perhaps most widely seen from The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, where the loose and relaxed narration shifted the spotlight to what was happening in the gameplay. Breath of the Wild gives the player an objective and tools to complete it.
シンプルにシチュエーションとゴールだけがあり、到達できるかというルールのみを存在させています。
And that breadth of options allows for personal experiences within the game, but it also makes the acquisition of those tools an experience as well. And something like the lack of permanence from equipment forces improvisation. And the character abilities can be attained at any time from their respective sections on the map.
Impressive, I know. Very few can achieve a mastery of the sky. Yet I have made an art of creating an updraft that allows me to soar.
And it's that emphasis on improvisation that grounds these personal experiences as unique. The gameplay crafting a story and how players handle situations makes not only a story that is unique to an individual player, but one that can only be done through playing a game. But games, including the ones I listed, still have narratives engraved into the game itself, something that will always be constant. Link trying to save Hyrule, agents trying to recapture Invisible Ink. So what happens when a player's story and a game's constant narrative interact with one another?
Who are you? Snake?
Metal Gear Solid 5 examines this divide between player and game narratives by creating a game world that evolves with the gameplay and a fixed narrative driven through cutscenes. Akin to the games mentioned before, Metal Gear Solid 5 presents a situation,
Boss, make contact with the old man known as Code Talker,
and a goal, then lets the player figure out how to reach that goal. But subsequent missions react to how the player handled previous missions. If you frequently attack at night, enemies start wearing night vision goggles.
Enemy presence analysis. The map has been updated. Analysis complete.
If you regularly shoot enemies in the head, they'll wear helmets more often. The game's reaction to the player in turn forces the player to react differently to the game. That's where Metal Gear creates improvisation, by having a constant back and forth between the player and how the game presents situations.
プレイヤーのアクションとそれに反応するオブジェクト、さらにそのオブジェクト同士も影響し合うように作っておく。
The objectives of these missions stay constant, but how they're completed becomes the focus as that evolves. Acknowledging how a player has played the game makes the actions taken much more impactful. And this is something that's been briefly seen in Metal Gear's history with Metal Gear Solid 3.
Are you one of the Cobras?
In the boss fight against the Sorrow, where you revisit all the soldiers you've killed, each body reflects how they were killed.
Oh, my neck! My head's gonna fall!
But Metal Gear Solid 5 intersects the player and game narratives at its conclusion when it's revealed that the player character is not Big Boss, but someone that Big Boss robbed of their identity.
He'll take your place. From here on, he's Snake.
I say revealed, which is a little generous since it's heavily teased throughout the game.
Who are you? Who am I? You're talking to yourself.
This alters the constant narrative driven through the cutscenes, but because the character robbed of their identity was created by the player at the start of the game, it alters the player's narrative as well. This sort of intersection between a constant narrative and one that varies showcases how games can both create and tell stories exclusive to the medium.
I cheated death thanks to you. And thanks to you, I've left my mark. You have too. You've written your own history.
Intersecting a game's narrative with that of the players isn't the only way games can mesh story and gameplay. Think on how other moments and cutscenes can then impact how you play. Injury is a common element throughout games, but which method conveys the severity of an injury to a player? If a character gets hurt in a cutscene or in any moment where control is taken away from the player, do you keep gameplay consistent and return to jumping and shooting like normal? Or do you strip down control to convey weakness, limiting the player's motion and attack patterns? After the player regains control, are they limited in any way?
Oh, did you want to practice first?
Do you add increased weight to player movement, turning something as trivial as walking into a struggle?
I'm okay.
You're not okay, Joel. Now come on.
If gameplay is the defining trait that sets games apart from other forms of media, its impact on the game needs to be respected just as much as the constant narrative. And when they're interwoven with one another, it just shows how unique storytelling in games can be.